So great to have you back for another study in the churches of Revelation. And today we begin our study in the church of Pergamum, which is the third church among the churches listed in Revelation. It's a very interesting church with a great background. I do want to say before I go any further that I'm so grateful for people who tune into this little video each week. Thank you. I know we have some regular folks who view it in Australia and Papua New Guinea, places that I've had the opportunity to visit and live in Papua New Guinea, and which are still very close to my heart. But I think Singapore as well. And anyway, if you want to, just in the comments, just put where you're from, and I'll try to mention the different countries or states in the United States where people check out this little video. But I never thought that God would give an opportunity like this to me to talk to people around the world. So you never know what the Lord has in mind. Well, let's look at the scripture. It's Revelation 2:12 through 17. So follow along as I read. To the angel of the church in Pergamum, write, these are the words of him who has the sharp, double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne, yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city, where Satan lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some among you who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin, so that they ate food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. Likewise, you also have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Repent, therefore, otherwise I will soon come to you and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. Well, Pergamum, and you'll see from the map here, was the capital of Asia. And you'll see from where the churches of Revelation are that it was the northernmost of those. But it had some things going against it. It was not on any major trade routes, so it was very poorly located for commerce. And yet, at the time that Revelation was written, it was one of the largest cities in the world with 200,000 people in population. It had great statues throughout the city. It was really quite beautiful. Now, Pergamum was divided into an upper and a lower city, and you'll see from the picture the ruins that are on the upper city, which are still pretty extant and look really good. The upper city was on a hill that rose 1,000 feet or 300 meters. It had thick walls with watchtowers. It gave it great protection. And although it had a great fortress, it didn't have a natural water supply. So that was a real problem if there was a siege. So what was done is they constructed massive cisterns to collect water and to serve in time of a siege, perhaps. And also an aqueduct was made that brought water to the city. Also, it's interesting to note with Pergamum, it was never conquered by the Romans. Instead, the dying king of Pergamum, whose name was Attalus III, had no heirs. He had no children. And so rather than, just let the city go into some sort of chaos, he in his will, he gave the city to the Roman Empire. Rather interesting thing, a king willing his city to somebody. So they became an early ally of Rome, and of course that became a key feature and part of what they were about. Now, there's a couple of things that were really very famous about Pergamum at the time. One was their library. Now, the library had over 200,000 volumes, which was the second largest library in the world at the time. Only the library in Alexandria, Egypt, was larger. And so there was a great rivalry between Alexandria and Pergamum about the libraries. And so it had all sorts of little bits of intrigue with that, believe it or not. Pergamum decided that the way to get their library on top was to hire the librarian that was in Alexandria. Well, the king in Alexandria found out about that and was none too pleased. And so he put the librarian in jail for even considering it. That'll teach him. And to punish Pergamum, he cut off their supply of papyrus. Now, papyrus was the only writing material, other than stone, of course, the only writing material in the ancient world at that time. It was made from the reeds that grew in the Nile, and so when the Alexandrian king cut off the supply of papyrus, it was essentially starving, if you will, or choking off the library there in Pergamum, and so that was a real crisis. But the people of Pergamum were pretty ingenious, and so they came up with an idea, and they said, "Well, we can find some substitute for papyrus," and so they made a great paper out of animal skins that lasted longer and which was much higher quality. And you'll see it here on the screen, called parchment. And parchment, the name parchment actually comes from the name of the city, Pergamum. So that's how parchment got its name, in case you're ever asked something of trivia. Well, Alexandria's library was destroyed by fire. And so Antony, this is a lot of history for people who like history stuff, who, as a gift to Cleopatra, went to Pergamum, cleaned out their library, and gave it to the city of Alexandria. Well, of course, that didn't go over well at all. Well, later Octavian, who became Caesar Augustus, when he defeated Antony and became the undisputed ruler of Rome, he gave all those things, the collection, back to Pergamum. So he became quite a hero to the people of Pergamum. Well, there's another thing that was famous for. It was a medical center, and of the god Asclepius. And I'm going to put up here on here, you'll see the symbol of Asclepius, which is still used by the medical profession today, a rod with two snakes entwined on it. And it comes from this god Asclepius. So the place was called, it was a temple of Asclepius. And let me just read a little bit of the description of this. This is pretty interesting stuff. Of not only the worship and observance of Asclepius, but also the medical center and what they did there. So I'm sorry, it's a little bit long, but please stay with me. It says the temple of Asclepius in its day had a wall 120 feet high, richly painted with scenes depicting the god of healing at work. At the center of the room, a sole piece of furniture today, stands a short, round stone pillar 4 feet high, carved on the side with two intertwined snakes, the sign of the god of healing. The top of the stone was slightly concave, and a small fire burned there continuously, for this was the altar to the god Asclepius, where visitors were met by a priest and obliged to buy a measure of incense to be deposited upon the flames as a votive offering. A slave then led the patient through intimidating huge brass doors into a large park skirted with colonnaded walls on all sides. At the center of the park was a villa, which housed the sacred pool with priests and attendants, where the patients were taken and invited to step down into ankle-deep water while the priests ascertained the symptoms of the illness before determining the level of votive offering required for the healing. The patient bartered with the priest toward a reasonable price to appease Asclepius and secure healing. If it was not enough, then water would flood into the pool, but if not, only a trickle would appear. Since effective healing was possible, but not guaranteed, only if the water rose to waist level, the first sum discussed was never enough. Bargaining would continue until the price reached would be what was considered by the priest to be enough. Once positive thinking attitude was established, the patient was given a sacred mud bath and then transferred to the herbal bath, where a strong drug vapor was inhaled. When the patient was sufficiently sleepy from the drug vapor, he was taken for a long walk through the whispering corridor, so named for the soft whispering voices of the court of Asclepius, which could be heard wafting from the ceiling as they sang encouraging ditties of healing. Shafts of light seemed to shine down on the patient, even from where the court was singing. Excavation has revealed that on the roof of the corridor were openings which had small chimneys that focused the light of the bright sun into the corridor. Groups of priests stood around and sang gentle songs into the chimney, creating an echoing, mysterious sound. By the time the patient reached the far end of the whispering corridor, he was heavily drowsy and high on spirituality and drugs. Once the effects wore off, the patient made their way to the villa, where more positive thinking psychotherapy could be administered, which might be followed by further sacred mud treatment or quiet convalescence at the villa. Available at the convalescent were gardens in which to walk, a theater, a library, conversation, and one could simply relax on the covered terraces and drink in the beautiful scenes of nature. Now, that is from Bishop Terence Kelshaw, the Anglican Church of North America, who gave us that description. Now, the centers is specialized in treatments of the digestive tract. And of course, as was said, they used this kind of whole person type of treatment with exercise, music, drama, literature, and rest. The theater could seat 3,500, and you can actually see it behind me. Whoops, over here. That's the theater right there. At night, they would take people to the temple, and it was filled with tame snakes. For those of you who don't like snakes, you don't like to hear that. Snakes were the symbol of Asclepius. So patients were encouraged to believe that by touching the snakes, it was the same as touching the god. There it is. Now, there are other things that were interesting about Pergamum, and that was their religious life. Pergamum had the largest statue of Zeus in the ancient world, displayed on an enormous platform that stood 800 feet or 240 meters above the city. So it just towered over everybody. Amazing. It would have been kind of awe-inspiring. It resembled a throne. And what Jesus said about the throne of Satan, we're going to come back to that and how that came right into the 20th century. Very interesting. And we'll talk about that in the lesson, I think, next week. It was believed that Zeus was actually born in Pergamum. So adding to the drama of Zeus's worship, they had a way of making this statue work with smoke that would come up, and the statue could move to make it look alive. So, of course, imagine the worshiper expecting the statue just to be standing there, and all of a sudden the arm lifted or the head turned or something. Well, they would be totally freaked out by that. And I mean, it was really pretty amazing. It's a lot of theater is what it was. In fact, Pergamum was a lot of theater, if you get right down to it. But as troublesome as the worship of Zeus was, and Asclepius and some other gods, what was really the biggest problem for the Christians, in addition to all this, of course, was that I mentioned to you Octavian, who is later Caesar Augustus, and what he did in restoring the library in Pergamum, and how grateful the people were for that. And so they were the very first to construct a temple to a living Caesar. They were the very first who required people to go in before the statue of Augustus, kneel down and say, Caesar is Lord, and require people to burn incense and get their certificate. So the Caesar worship that spread throughout the Roman Empire started here. So when Jesus says that this was a seat of Satan, you can understand why he said that. So it was a very, very difficult place for people to be believers. And we'll talk again more about that next week. But that's the background of Pergamum. It was a fascinating place. It's still a wonderful place to visit today because so many of the ruins are there. But we're going to see how what Jesus said, knowing this background of Pergamum, helped to tie in the message of what he wanted these people to hear and what he wants us to hear today. So come back with us next week and we'll pick this up again, and we'll take 2 more Sundays to cover this. Thank you again for being with us. God bless you.